That your entire organization runs and owns innovation, and different groups own different pieces of it. And so that ability for you all to come together to share the ideas during their inception, right? To be able to say, oh, well, what is our reality? Do we have a shared source of truth? And what are we really trying to do? How does all that come together just for the piece that might be about what the idea is? Then we need to think about how that gets carried through the entire rest of the journey. Because not anybody can come up with an idea, but really it's about creating a strategy around it. It's about validating, it's about getting support for it. It's about actually applying resources to it and ushering it through, and realizing that those ideas, however great, sometimes can take 1,000 efforts to try to actually return or start to generate profitability. Really what underlies it is that ability in this new world to work with one another, to share that information, to share data and understanding across your organization around innovation in order to move those ideas. Because otherwise, your ecosystem is a little bit like your supply chain or your value chain, but it's really looking at the entire world of your business in which it operates. So partners, players, but also things like, what's your business model? So are we built for change? Are we still relevant? Can we still rely on our partners? These are things that are wildly important things. Assessing your capabilities. So what are your soft skills? What are the things that you do that others don't? What gives you competitive advantage? What you really need to do is take a look at how then your ideas get to market. How are they created, and what are all of those obstacles that you face to actually having them mature? That's going to be key. That's going to be a huge piece. And that's about asking yourself some very, very difficult questions, digital transformation efforts, cultural change, things that are typically not associated with innovation, but it's those things that are going to have to take place in order to drive innovation forward. Finally, what's important? This is a big piece as well. Innovation, we often look at it through, oh, well, what's our goals? What's our business strategy? What do we want to be accomplishing from our bit of expertise, right? This is a great opportunity to say, wait a minute, what's important to the world? What do we value as human beings, and what can we contribute to?
At some point in the life cycle of virtual, every organization, its ability to succeed despite itself runs out. The firms have started to move away from the self-contained organization into more of an ecocentric ecosystem view. So that had impact, and it still has quite a lot of impact in terms of the business environment that one operates in, your own business model, and also the impact on the culture. One of the mining companies are doing all and most of the training now with virtual training and virtual reality. Asset ownership, that's changed significantly to the asset access to assets, and it's going to accelerate. So if you think about the estate agent companies now, I've got a big problem because there's a lot of people that's got real estate that's not going to be used in future. So it's also to other ways to where you have to buy and build assets previously. Now basically you can rent it, which obviously gives you a lot of capital available to put into things like your customer journeys. Customers are now defined by behaviors, and that's far more difficult because you need to have data. And autonomous peering versus where you had the central authority that goes hand in hand with trust. Actually, before we started this session, Zenzile mentioned the fact that you need to trust your employees more, and it's been accelerated now. The commercial acumen, it's the business, and a lot of people spend a lot of time there. But what we've seen now is that more and more that has gone out of whack, and it has actually been brought very into the forefront that the science portion can't be the only one that people are looking at in a business to look from, to maximize profits and profitability and productivity and so on. There's a component of art in the business, and that's what I call the fire of the business. That is the people. That is when you weave the science with the human potential and growth. And there are things like that you need to be cognizant of, and skills that you need to get is resilience, decision making. I think, Moira, you've talked about emotional intelligence. That's becoming more and more important. How we process all of this information, those are the skills. It's this merging of the scientific objective stuff with this human, this fire, spirit, and that's purpose, is to create a purpose which others can follow and believe in. What does that mean? It means inspirational, motivational, building partners and thinking strategically. Get that there are certain things that needs to stay stable. What are those things? So sources for stability includes things like having a clear purpose. Stability is created through common identity and a culture, through constant training for the new environment, because people then feel more secure that they're ready for this new challenges that comes up all the time. Stable leadership, stable relationships, because if you have stable relationships with your customers, if things go pear-shaped like we have now, you can use those relationships to go into new products, go into new areas, and they will follow you. Apple, we call shape shifting, not dramatic restructurings and transformation, but reallocating of your resources all the time, on an ongoing basis. Flexibility in your processes and technology so that it doesn't keep you hostage. There needs to be a modular approach to your technology, a plug and play, an options-oriented approach to opportunities. No? And what does that mean? It means that we don't commit to just one. Healthy disengagements. What does it mean? It means that rather than defending your advantage to the bitter end, you need to end certain advantages frequently and systematically. And be proactive and not hold on to what you might perceive is your competitive advantage. And also, because you will do this so regularly, what will happen is that exits will occur in a steady rhythm, and it will not be this dramatic change for the business all the time. Be careful for when you talk about innovation to think about this dramatic one big idea. Innovation happens at the edge of the business, and we can have them all the time.
That if you're able to simplify what your focus is, and so really knowing very succinctly what your promise is to your customers and to yourself, and if you're able to simplify your thinking on your machine of growth, and as I'll share in a bit, not only how you're growing but where you're growing and how your brand is supporting your growth. And if you're able to simplify your thinking on delivering your promise, then we have found that will achieve clarity, confidence, control, and ultimately momentum. If you haven't validated with your customers, and if you haven't really proven that there is an audience out there who not only receives value but is also willing to share some of that value with you, then please don't build, don't design, don't create. And so there's that iterative process of discovery. But before you start new initiatives, before you start changing your organization, can you, as an entrepreneur, ideally with your leadership team, get on the same page, at least with knowing what your purpose is as an organization, knowing clearly who your customer is and who your customer is not, knowing what your product is, and of course between the customer and the product is your value proposition. So a whole other discussion. I love the comment, I think it was by Matt, about the experience design as opposed to the internal process design. So if you not only do you have a product, you have an emotional experience you're co-creating with that customer, because remember, it's what the customer remembers about the experience, which will determine if they're going to come back to you or not, or if they're going to share and recommend your product. And then there's the mindset. So do you have the appropriate mindset in order to achieve all of the above? But if you're able to get this clear with your team, you will absolutely be able to accelerate. It takes quite some decision making to boil that down. To come back to Matt's point about the experience on the left as versus the process on the right, because this is your ability to deliver effectively is essentially an internal or an ecosystem perspective, as opposed to the emotional experience based on your brand that you're creating with your customers. So there's quite a bit of interconnectedness. Ignore the middle and the right side of the canvas unless you've been able to validate the focus domain and the mindset. But if you're able to have a meaningful dialogue with your customer and say, hey, this is why I'm here, this is who I believe you are, this is a product that I think, talk about job to be done that can solve your need, this is how I'd like to do it with you, as far as the experience, and this is what we're bringing to the table as far as abundance mindset or growth mindset or ecosystem mindset or whatever the appropriate mindset is. You will learn so tremendously much and go through iterate this a few times. Once you're comfortable with that, then you can fill out the rest of the canvas and then loop back to the work that Matt and Vera also suggested. Maybe if they've discovered more clarity of their purpose through this Corona crisis, because that's really has put pressure on why do we exist and what do we really stand for. So,
and being in the automotive field and sector, that took a toll, because the needs that we used to satisfy are no longer primary and at the core of who we are. So we certainly had to forego what we knew ourselves as. It was a shock to the system, and it put the leadership in a tailspin this time. And what does relevance mean?
You're able to look something like this. I've taken it from somewhere, but with beginner's eyes, because sometimes we're so close and experts in our organization that when things change, we can sometimes feel paralyzed. But then how do you take a step back and really look at it from beginner's eyes? Maybe you have different assets and different relationships and a different ecosystem that you can apply a different type of value there. Because what you have is amazing. I'm sure you have amazing intimate relationships with these people that are in need.
So now those things have flipped on their heads. Those nice to haves and perceived high value things have become the only things that we actually still holding time at the same time, but nerve-wracking, because you have a workforce that looks to you to consistently communicate that tomorrow may not be certain, but we still got you. We've got your back and we'll still be able to pay you. But the question is, for how long?
It's such a complex set of challenges, isn't it?
The assumptions that we make, like we really need to, what we often have our clients do is like, let's write down what our basic assumptions are. And that might be that we, what is it that we do? And we write that, and what needs are those absolutely solving? And then we say, is that true? Is that all we do? And when we start to question those assumptions, then we start to go, well, wait a minute. And that's the hardest part, because as companies, it's our job to move our product, right? It's like, this is ours. And if you've ever tried to do an exercise with people around empathy with the customer and mapping the customer journey, I guarantee you, it shifts about 15 minutes into what are we selling? What's our sales process? And we're shoehorning customers into the assumptions that we make. And what we need to do is really hold ourselves accountable to say, what is it that they need? What is it that we're really trying to solve for them? And when it doesn't fit our product or our service, we go, well, we don't do that. And the question is really, how might we help with that? And then you need to break out your resources and say, how might we apply some of our resources that we have to doing this? So
I'd like to recommend maybe don't do this, but do something that makes you feel a little uncomfortable, wear an itchy sweater or a toe tight of jeans or something. And so when you're actually going through that experience, you're constantly reminded to the best that you can look at it from the outside in, look at it from the outside lens.
In an age of corporations and acquisitions where management did not found a company, they are not bound to the purpose, right? Like Patagonia is still managed by the guy who started it all, and so that passion diffuses from the top down. What have been some of the challenges, and how might people really work through with a management team who believes that their goal is, or their purpose is, to make money for shareholders? How do you get them to focus on the customer, on product, on having that real something that employees can really latch onto? Have all these ideas, but which one is right? Like, which one are we going to invest, $1 million in? And I think then the next step in the trick is, how do you very lightly go out and test that? You have to go speak to your customers. The assumption is that we need to go out with a full-blown service, right? Like, we need to make all this stuff and have it, and here we are with all our pile of offerings. I would wager that you can actually go out and just test with a few customers and say, would this appeal to you? If we were to do this, would this appeal to you? Just to, test the waters and see if that's a good idea. Learn a bit and then continue to iterate. And it's about starting small, really small, very, very low investment, but just getting it started, and then gaining momentum and say, hey, there are people who are interested in this. Oh, this could be a thing. They really want this. Well, what if we did this? And the ball starts to roll. And it's not an all or nothing. Like, innovation should not be, we're pushing all our money into this particular spot. It should be progressive bets that get smarter and smarter and smarter.
It starts with the mindset. Okay, I think people have mentioned the fact that no sacred cows, but it's also not to be married to any of the products, the services, how this organization is set up. Because someone else also shared this, that a lot of organizations go under within 5 years. But what people are not talking about, that there are actually other points in an organization's life cycle where precisely they are doing so well that they get married to those ideas, and that actually trips them up. So when there's another cycle at around 15 years, then there's another cycle at 50 years. And some of the research that's shown that the organizations that's 100 plus years, a lot of them, example, started with product and even with a whole brand and what they stood for. And if you compare it 100 years later, it's a total different organization, but they had the mindset of opportunities. They were not married to ideas. They were not married to a certain way things get done. It's that flexibility in mind before you can do anything in terms of flexibility, moving, the business processes, or a lot of talk about the softer skills. And that is what will make the difference in terms of, yes, we need to have that drive, but also be that flexible mindset. This is not working. Let's go for the next one.
The only time I've seen a fundamental mindset change is when leadership has changed dramatically, and the tone starts at the top. But I would love if other people could challenge that.
But when you do something successful, you start getting, that's when you get married to that idea. I mean, that is that whole thing around the innovator's dilemma. And also, if you ask the same people the same questions and say, but things have been going well. And that is what's interesting about this situation that we're currently in, is that all of that has been just toppled. One of the opportunities is coming out from this situation where we're at, is that for a lot of people, it's a very real conversation that you can start with to say, but look what has happened. You cannot just be married to the way that you have done this.
What would each of you say is the single most important lever for creating an innovative mindset in the organization as a whole? What is
to allow space for failure?
But it needs to be rigorous and decisive in the learning. Otherwise, it's just a big corporate, innovation party. And so for me, there's a counterbalance of being absolutely a mindset of open for failure and learning and discovery, and an absolute intolerance for unnecessary incompetence. And that means for management, make sure you have the right people on the right project and you have the right support and all those other things. And those two things together, I think, will really help accelerate.
It's never going to happen without leadership's buy-in. You need leaders who walk the walk and talk the talk. You know, you can't have a leader who says, yeah, we'll tolerate failure and let's be really experimental. But then when you get with them and share the, reports of performance, and they put people's heads on the chopping block for failure, you're sending a mixed message. Like,
you find that the appetite for risk, verbally it is there, but come time for review and the POC didn't go as intended, it puts the teams at a place where they wish they hadn't started, and then in future will shy away.
We treat the C-suite like your customer. Like, that's what we do. We say, what are your fears? What are your needs? Let's empathize with what's on your mind. And in doing that, in understanding and getting them to express what is important to them and what they have at risk, then you can begin to introduce how might we then begin to develop a program whereby we are innovation is not going to happen overnight. You're not going to make the next iPod. Like, you're just not. But what you can do is start moving toward that. But don't push all of your chips into the middle of the bet.
I think it comes down to three things. There's the mindset, there's the strategy, and then there's the organization, so the structure. So if the executive already knows that they should be allowing failure and supporting that and holding people accountable to fail well, etc. And if you have an innovation strategy, it means, okay, we've earmarked this 10%, 20% for discovery innovation as opposed to core efficiency innovation or whatever, and you have that hard discussion up front, where you can allocate what, and then, because that gives them comfort. And then if you have a structure of innovation, so okay, this is what we're going to measure and what we're not going to measure, and so it gives them the confidence that you're not just blowing cash, and then also make sure that whatever you're reporting and the artifacts and the ceremonies of this, are constantly reminding, don't cut off their heads. Even if there's a role that takes the executive aside and says, don't cut off their heads.
And what they have done is they've added the normal balance scorecard. You've got your 4 dimensions, but what they have done is actually they've added the 5th dimension in terms of their values. And people could not actually get promotion. They could not even get increases, even if they've done all 4 of the other balance scorecard. That was almost like the veto, part of your balance scorecard. They needed to show proof. Colleagues need to write recommendations how they've lived to their values.